Ik leer Italiaans in de gevangenis. Mooie poëtische taal. Padre nostre, ma liberaci del male, amen. Ik heb de dienst justitiële inrichtingen zover weten te krijgen dat me iedere dag La Repubblica wordt bezorgd. Al begrijp ik niet waarom die altijd een paar dagen later komt.
In your work you've criticized very often the tendency in society to accept the excuses criminals give for their behavior. Is that tendency still strong?
Well, in fact, the criminals, in my experience, reflect back the excuses that we give to them. So the excuses don't originate with them; they originate from people like myself, actually.
They learned their excuses from you.
Yes, yes. So that, for example, someone who steals an enormous number of cars will ask, "Am I addicted to stealing cars?" And and oddly enough, there was not very long before that, there were academic papers in which it was suggested that stealing cars was an addiction, and they gave the neurological circuitry. Now, this was pretty obscure stuff, but nevertheless, it did filter down to the criminal, who was then able to reflect it back. And of course, I mean, more generally, they would say, well, do I burgle houses? Doctor, do I keep burgling houses because of my childhood? And I say, no, it's because you're lazy and stupid. and they'd start to laugh.
They start to laugh. They didn't feel insulted.
No, they feel relieved. They don't.
So, now I know what's happening to me. I'm just lazy and stupid. Well, that's a relief.
It is a relief.
Why is it a relief?
Because then they can start talking to you honestly. Then they know that the relationship between you and them is an honest one. Because they know perfectly well that they do not burgle houses because of their unhappy childhood, even though it is certainly true that most criminals have had very unhappy childhoods because they've been brought up in often very terrible circumstances. But it still is not true that they burgle houses because of their unhappy childhood.
Well, I hate to confess it, but I am a lawyer.
Why do you hate to confess it?
Sorry. But actually, it's very irrelevant. First of all, I want to say thank you for being here. I'm a great admirer of your work, and I think more people are here. But referring to your other books, like Life at the Bottom, you describe how useless it is to help people who are addicted to drugs, beaten up by their husbands or their men or whatever, all those victims who are living at the bottom. What would happen if we stop helping them? We just pull the plug, no more help, no more nothing. What would happen?
Well, I'm not saying that people can't be helped. It's the different kind of help that I think is needed. For example, if you take drug addicts, it's treated as a technical medical problem. And I think there are good arguments I think I have good arguments as to why it is not a technical medical problem. And if you approach it as a technical medical problem, you actually make the situation worse by hiding from them the truth of their own situation. So I'm not saying that you can't help anybody, but part of the help must be to get them to see the truth.
But you say that...
And with regard to, for example, women who are very badly treated, and I used to see, I think it was something in the region of 400 cases every year. I mean, so I saw actually thousands of such cases. While I did not ever say that they were not victims, it was important for them to know that they were not just victims, because if they thought they were just victims, they have to wait for somebody else to do something about it. So I had no, I didn't say they were not victims, but they would present themselves as simply victims, helpless. And the important thing is to let them, try and get them to see that they are not helpless. And in fact, most of them eventually would leave the person who was abusive towards them, for example. Or if you could expose what they had contributed to the whole situation, because that was something they could do something about. So I'm not saying you can't help people, but unfortunately the help that most people get is of a very technical and, in my view, uncompassionate nature.
Why uncompassionate?
Because to disguise from people their own contribution to their situation actually keeps them in that situation. So it lacks compassion. Also, it's undiscriminating. I can tell you that, for example, I mean, the problem is that you need discrimination in order to be compassionate. I can give you a very simple example. If I would see in my hospital someone who, through no fault of his or her own, was in a particularly pitiable condition and needed public help because there was no other help available for them. If I said to social workers or anybody, this is a particularly deserving case, they would say, do you mean there are undeserving cases? I mean, that is the logical corollary of saying that all cases are equal. And since actually what happens is that help is allocated on the basis of supposed need, then what happens is the people who make themselves most needy get more help than those in the truly pitiable condition.